What's up guys, hello to Footballtalk here. I'm back on YouTube after focusing the last month on written pieces about the biggest breakout candidates among second and third year guys and personal top 100 players for the 2022 NFL season. Preseason is underway for all 32 teams and we're right in the heart of fantasy season. So like I've done for the last few years, I wanted to give you some of my favorite targets in drafts at every position other than kicker, because really I just don't care. Just get one from a great offense and stream when needed. So just for reference, I primarily play in half PPR leagues with one quarterback. Of course, if you play Superflex, the whole strategy changes. And thinking of best ball formats, you may be looking at players known for major spike weeks or guys with more consistent production. I try to offer names from both categories because I do believe in building rosters that way in redraft formats. This is what I'm gonna do here. I'll talk about 3 quarterbacks, 5 running backs, 5 wide receivers, 3 tight ends, and then quickly mention 3 defenses. Those were chosen based on my personal rankings compared to where they usually go in fantasy drafts of the following 7 sites: NFL.com, ESPN, Yahoo, CBS, Underdog, Best Ball 10s, and FFPC. Thanks for the numbers provided by 444.com, who average all of those out, so I wouldn't have to do my own calculations again. And I thought this was pretty representative for all users then. Just consider whenever you're listening to this that the rankings I used here are from August 18th noon Eastern time, since there will be some changes still. I'll make the case for each player based on tape, statistics, and analyzing the situation that they're in. You can note them, and once you get to your drafts, you're kind of in a dead zone, not knowing exactly where to go next. These are names you can target. There's a lot of good stuff out there already on how to approach drafts in general, how to look at these positions as a whole heading into the year, and so on. I'm not going to give all my strategies away, since I do have to play myself still, but if you're interested, you can DM me on Instagram or Twitter, and I'll send you my full rankings in an Excel sheet for like $5. Either way, let's get into the first position here of these fantasy diamonds, which of course is the quarterbacks. And I want to start with a name that was on my list already last year, and just consistently goes a few spots too late, I feel like, and that is Derek Carr of the Raiders. Here's a stat on Carr that I'm sure many people haven't heard yet. He is the only quarterback in the NFL to complete at least 66% of his passes and throw for 4,000 plus yards in each of the last 4 seasons, and he hasn't missed a single game over that stretch. A few years ago, when people called Carr underrated based on the stats that he put up, I always harped on a lack of willingness to push the ball beyond the sticks, as one of the quarterbacks with the worst differentials to the first down marker. These past 2 years, he was 9th and then 2nd behind only Tom Brady last season, with 67 passes of 20 plus yards. Now the Raiders replaced Bryan Edwards with arguably the top wide receiver in football in Davante Adams, and one of the best offensive play calls over the last decade in Josh McDaniels will be in his ear, along with just not having all the off-field drama around the organization like last year. Look at the offenses McDaniels ran in New England. They pride themselves on being like a chameleon in terms of how they adjusted to their own personnel and who they were facing. Or we did see them use plenty of 12 and 21 personnel and put an emphasis on gap scheme power running. They do have a lot of the pieces to morph into that to some degree in Las Vegas, but with Darren Waller back healthy, his ability to flex out wide or stress defenses down the seams will open things up more for a quick-driven passing attack to keep the offense moving, putting less stress on Carr to have to make multiple adjustments at the line, and then find solutions to post-up rotations by the defense, because a lot of the concepts that McDaniels has typically utilized were multi-purpose, meaning they can be largely used against any coverage. It may be more of a ball control passing attack, but if that run game gets going, they will take their shots of play action, and they may have the toughest trio to deal with in the league once they get down to the red zone, which is why Carr hasn't been quite as high up in the fantasy rankings due to a lack of touchdowns. But you're just looking at the success of Davante has had in that area of the field, Wall's combination of size and explosiveness, and Renfrow is the guy who can double and triple move slot defenders to death. I personally have Carr right in the fringe of my top 10, ahead of guys like Aaron Rodgers, whose team has clearly morphed into a run game and defense-oriented approach, with several question marks at receiver, most importantly with Davante now gone, and also Russell Wilson, who will have a strong imprint on the Denver offense, but does not work under Nathaniel Hackett, who was a big part of what they did in Green Bay, has a phenomenal young running back that I'll get to in a couple of minutes, and simply won't have to carry the load as much, looking at what the Broncos have done defensively compared to the post-Legion of Boom era in Seattle. So I have him 3 spots up in my quarterback rankings, and I'll take him a good round earlier than that. Bringing us to a second name here, and we're already moving way down the board to Daniel Jones of the Giants. Currently going as a QB 24 and 165th overall. I personally have him 5 spots higher in my quarterback rankings and would be willing to take him a couple of rounds earlier, even though I probably don't have to. And I already know most of the people listening to this are rolling the eyes about this right now, But just give me a couple of minutes and hear me out why you shouldn't simply disregard this name. First of all, Daniel Jones was the QB 19 in fantasy points per game last season, so there already you have a slight edge if he just repeats what he did in 2022 across 17 games. Next, you're looking at the 3 projected receivers and running back in 11 personnel in Kenny Galladay, Sterling Shepard, and Kadarius Toney, along with Saquon Barkley. They missed a combined 24 weeks, and other than Toney, who I actually love as a sleeper this year as well, looking at those rare metrics that he put up in targets and yards per route run as a rookie, because we don't have a per reference, all of the other guys had the worst seasons in terms of per game production. Which brings us to the main point here, the changes in New York's coaching staff. You can argue if the team should have already taken a different path for the quarterback position, and the franchise not picking up his 50 option shows that he's entering a make or break season. But let's not forget that the offensive mind he's worked under have been Pat Shurmur and Jason Garrett, along with head coach Joe Judge, who had such little trust in his players that by the end of the season his team was running quarterback sneaks on 3rd and long. I'm a big fan of the changes that we have seen in the power structure in terms of the front office, personnel, and the coaching staff, but Jones now gets to work under Brian Daboll and Mike Kafka, who are instrumental in developing Josh Allen in Buffalo, which would be a ridiculous comparison, but at least in terms of the decision making for Jones and being able to utilize his strengths, those guys have that proven track record. Plus, from a pure fantasy perspective, matching that with a defensive coordinator in Wink Martindale, who likes to go for it with heavy pressure packages to get the ball back for his offense one way or another, create additional opportunities for them. So now for Jones to be in such a massive contract year, having added my top offensive tackle in the draft and 200 free agents to boost one of the worst offensive lines over the last few years, hopefully having a healthy Saquon and Toney, who I believe could be major bargains based on their ADPs due to the pure athletic traits that he brings to the table, having added another yak specialist in 2nd rounder Wendell Robinson from Kentucky, and working for an offensive coaching staff that actually understands how to utilize dynamic skill position players, which Buffalo under Daboll easily led the league in situation neutral pass rate at over 68% last season. Jones will probably go undrafted in the majority of leagues, but to me, to get a profile like this, with a guy who averages nearly 6 yards per carry for his career, and is set for the most quarterback-friendly fantasy schedule according to Fantasy Pros, this could be a steal for quarterback too. That's if I don't go with the other New York quarterback, and I was not only concerned for the sanity of Jets fans, but also potentially having to scratch my notes on Zach Wilson. But thankfully what was believed to be a torn ACL turned out to probably just knock him out for the rest of preseason, and win the first 2 regular games, which I would have probably not played him against the Ravens or Browns anyway. Either way, I talked about Wilson in depth in my piece on the biggest breakout candidates for 2022 over on my page hellofootballtalk.com, and if you're interested, I highly encourage you to check that out. There's no masking this. Wilson had a rough rookie campaign. Among quarterbacks with at least 200 passing attempts, he finished 32nd or 33rd in passer rating, QBR, net yards per attempt, DVOA, and EPA, so the numbers were obviously no bueno. With that, I believe if you look at the tape and particularly focus on the final 8 weeks, after Wilson came back from a PCL sprain, he was responsible for 8 touchdowns versus only 2 turnovers. I thought he had a much more defined plan pre-snap, and his ability to process information altogether got a lot quicker. 2 things where I believe he'll be much better set up for success this upcoming season. First, the Jets finished 2nd to last in adjusted games lost, according to Football Outsiders, when you're looking at injuries, as Wilson was missing his top 2 receivers for the majority of time, and they had to reshuffle the offensive line, while injuries in the backfield were a big factor as to why he ran the ball less than any team in the league, along with a banged up defense that finished dead last in yards and points allowed, to put extra pressure on the rookie quarterback. And second, and this is another stat from a write-up, Wilson was comfortably dead last in EPA versus man coverage and took 7 more sacks than anybody else in the league against it. That's despite facing the 18th most man coverage snaps. And you can argue that he's at fault to this to some degree maybe, but looking at the tape, those receivers simply did not win within the first 3 seconds, meaning he had to hold on to the ball and try to create something, which is actually where we saw some impressive plays from him. The of the screen, and we've seen him excel fitting the ball into tight windows in the red zone. I thought his ability to anticipate where to go against zone coverage was actually highly impressive, and to me he has the innate feel for rush angles and how to extend plays. Now he has his top receiver from a year ago back healthy, the drafted Ohio State's Garrett Wilson 10th overall, who was arguably the toughest route runner to deal with in the class and should do a lot of damage after the catch as the X receiver. They selected Breece Hall from Iowa State in the 2nd round to form a dynamic 1-2 puncher running back. They completely overhauled an underwhelming tight end room. They signed a Pro Bowl guard in Laken Tomlinson, and recently replaced the once again injured Mekhi Becton with a long-term veteran Dwayne Brown at tackle. Wilson healthy weight to be more sturdy inside the pocket. He has underrated elusiveness to add in some big scrambles. He has the weapons now to attack down the field, and there'll be less pressure on him, being able to effectively run play action and having guys to consistently beat man coverage. You can probably get him with the last couple of picks in the entire draft in one quarterback leagues. And if you just look at the disparity, QB 25 across the industry, and I have him all the way up at QB 17, which actually moved down a couple of spots once he got injured, so he could have even been higher. I believe he has the chance to take a big step forward. And that is us moving on to the running back position. Still the crown jewel of fantasy football to some degree, as much as we like big plays by receivers, but just the scarcity that you have at the position and how rewarding it is to actually find those jewels and have those running backs who really produce for you throughout the year. And I want to talk about a guy who I'm very high on here first, Javonte Williams of the Denver Broncos. I don't believe the average fan realizes how awesome Javonte was during his rookie season. Finally, he and veteran Melvin Gordon actually carried the ball exactly 203 times, which allowed to actually score twice as many touchdowns on, while both finished with just over 900 yards on the ground. However, the Rook already caught 50 more passes for over 100 additional yards, and it's the advanced stats that really were impressive. And this once again is directly from a write-up on 2022 breakout candidates. Williams forced 63 missed tackles on 203 rushing attempts, according to PFF, which was just 3 short of the league's leader in the category in Jonathan Taylor of the Colts, who carried the ball 129 additional times. And 14 other players did take more handoffs altogether than him and still finished below in those missed tackle rate rankings. In fact, the rookie's missed tackle rate of 31% was the highest mark since Marshawn Lynch in 2014. This dude has incredible contact balance, packs a nasty stiff arm, and just runs with incredible determination. Having run almost exclusively zone and some power concepts in college, there's room for Williams to improve his pacing and ability to manipulate blockers in order to maximize running lanes and build up that momentum, which makes him so tough to stop. Another year in the system will be huge for him. In terms of the passing game, there's a new coaching staff in place, but generally they already trusted Williams in protection, and he averaged 7.3 yards per catch despite hauling passes 0.6 yards behind the line of scrimmage on average last season. And a piece that I've already referenced a couple of times now, there's a lot of numbers on running backs playing alongside Russell Wilson, with several signs for an uptick in production with increased work. Just fundamentally, having a legitimate quarterback who's at his best pushing the ball down the field, particularly outside the numbers, to take advantage of a talented receiving corps should lead to a lot more too high coverages and light boxes for Williams to run against, along with a bunch of space created underneath as a checkdown option if Russ can't let it go. The Broncos did bring back Melvin Gordon on a 1-year, $2.5 million contract, but considering they let him test the market and looking at the number compared to what it was last year, along with just listening to all the reports out of Denver, Williams should get the bulk of snaps, and I believe he has top 5 upside at the position, so getting him at the 2-3 turn in your draft could be a tremendous move. He's actually slid a few spots already, now to 23 overall and RB13. I'm personally willing to draft him 10 spots earlier, even though I will take advantage of where he's going currently, and if I grab an RB1 here, that's just pure gold. Bringing us to the J.K. Dobbins. He was on my breakout candidates and draft diamonds list a year ago already, and I was ready for him to blow up. But then in the Ravens' final preseason game, he tore a couple of ligaments in his knee and was done for the year. However, this was by far not the only injury that the team was dealing with. In fact, the top 3 running backs on the roster missed the whole year, and they were dealing with multiple injuries on the O-line. Lamar was out for the final 5 games, and although the team was number 1 by a wide margin in adjusted games lost to injury, according to Football Outsiders. Why am I mentioning this? Well, a lot of the arguments I've seen out there about the uptick in pass play percentage for Baltimore, yards per carry for the running backs, and so on, don't really take into account what the team wanted to be offensively. Looking at 2019 and 20, the Ravens were easily number 1 in total rushing yards, as the only team above 3,000 in each of those, and yards per carry respectively at 5.5. Sure, a lot of that has to do with Lamar being a dynamic space play himself, but he also opened up nice lanes on the inside give, as teams had to account for him pulling the ball, and Dobbins was particularly impressive on the chances that he was given. After having the battle for carries early on as a rookie in 2020, the flashes that he showed, combined with Mark Ingram missing time with an injury and opening up opportunities for him, that year Dobbins averaged 6 yards per carry, and from week 8 on, he was the RB12 in fantasy, despite only averaging 12 touches per contest. He was already the primary goal line and passing down option as a rookie, and didn't fumble the ball once. Dobbins provides the acceleration to be a threat to the edge on toss plays, swing passes, and so on, but I thought he showed the ability to be more patient between the tackles and make subtle moves in tight areas to bleed out runs. The Ravens get back All-Pro left tackle Ronnie Stanley, the upgrade at center and right tackle I believe, diversified the portfolio at tight end along with Mark Andrews. Now that one of the best blockers at the position, Nick Ball, is back in the lineup, and they get two rookies who can be threats catching the ball on the move, with a healthy Lamar drawing extra eyes. You add a healthy and upgraded defense to help them stay ahead in contests, stick with game plans that emphasize draining the clock, while Dobbins remains the likely option if they are down and are in more fast-paced situations. I think there's a lot of factors that should have people excited. I understand the risk here, but that's already baked into his ADP as the RB20 and 47th overall player, and I'm more than willing to take that from a likely flex when I personally have him as the 27th overall player in RB14. Bringing us to the next back here, and that is Tony Pollard of the Dallas Cowboys. Call me an Ezekiel Elliott hater, but this is the second straight year I heavily want to bet against him and on the talent of Tony Pollard more importantly. I understand at this point it's almost become this hipster opinion that Pollard should take more touches of Zeke, but I don't mind riding that wave just because I believe this one is a much more dangerous and useful player outside of pass protection. To belabor the point, in 2021, Pollard beat out Zeke by a significant margin in yards per carry and yards per catch, PFF rushing and receiving rate, elusive rating, and yards per route run. And it's not just a direct comparison, Pollard also set career highs in rush attempts and receptions, as well as yards per in both facets, with 6.4 yards per touch and well over 1,000 yards despite not playing in 2 games. Since the Cowboys regretfully handed Zeke the $90 million contract, which still has him tied for the second highest average annual value, his total per game production and efficiency have declined all 3 seasons, yet the Cowboys have insisted on keeping him the focal point of this offense, and we just heard Jerry Jones hop on that mindset once again, which I don't doubt is going to be the plan initially, but at some point the coaching staff and Mike McCarthy, who already had to answer questions about job security at initial press conferences due to the Sean Payton reports, and Kellen Moore, who I look at as one of the brighter offensive minds in the NFL, looking for head coaching opportunities himself, they have to put the ball in the hands of the players that will help them win. And I may sound way too much somebody who wants to down-talk Zeke. He should still maintain a role as an early down and short yardage runner with how well he can set up blocking and defenders, along with some 6-man pass pro reps, but his physical tools have diminished, leading to a career low 3 rushes of 20 plus yards and a broken tackle and worse than every 26 carries last season. I just think Pollard makes his offense so much harder to deal with. His explosiveness to rip off 10 plus yards frequently, how he can threaten the edges of the defense and create flow that way to set up misdirection, his elusiveness in space to expose leverage advantages in the pass game, where we saw Zeke get tackled for no yardage on flat routes routinely, or what he can do as a checkdown option as Dak has to come down to him after reading out some deep route combinations. I just believe he opens things up so much for them and puts defenses into conflict. Last season, Pollard was the RB28 in half PPR formats. He's even going slightly beyond that as RB30 and 86th overall, and that's despite his ever-increasing involvement in the offense, the efficiency screaming for more opportunities, with 165 awarded targets between Amari Cooper and Cedric Wilson to be split between guys that were already in the roster last year, and a third-round wide receiver in Jalen Tolbert, who, to be fair, I like a lot as a deep sleeper myself, and almost a statistical anomaly of just 2 offensive touchdowns for Pollard last season, despite his productiveness overall. That is bound to increase for an offense that has been top 2 in situation neutral and overall pace all 3 years under Kellen Moore, so to get him as a weekly flex option to me is a no-brainer, and I personally have him as my RB22, 64th overall. Bringing us to a running back for the Texas, which is Dameon Pierce. And as you can see already, the discrepancy from where he is ranked across the industry, 118th overall as RB41. I personally have him as 81st overall and RB28. And trust me on this one, I struggle with actually listing this guy here because I want people to stay quiet on him and keep his ADP low so I can just draft him in the double-digit rounds of every single one of my fantasy leagues. There are several misnomers around the Texans' run game and the backfield situation as far as I'm concerned. I'll kind of go through them and explain why I believe people are overstating those. First of all, there's no denying that Houston's run game was very underwhelming in 2021. They finished dead last with only 83.6 rushing yards per game and an underwhelming 3.4 yards per carry, with just 3 lousy games of cracking the century mark for yardage. Secondly, the snap shares and touch distribution at the running back position was a mess last season. The top 5 backs handled 147, 99, 99 again, 53 and 42 touches. There was very little consistency throughout the year. They added and cut names, and basically you couldn't put any of those in your lineup unless you got pretty lucky. And finally, just the offense as a whole had a tough time moving the ball largely, and didn't put it in the paint often enough. The 16.5 points per game were the 3rd fewest in the league, and only 7 of the touchdowns were contributed by the running back position. However, he would be my counterpoint. The Texans get back a Pro Bowl left tackle in Laremy Tunsil, They brought over AJ Khan from Jacksonville, who's a much better run blocker and pass protector, and they drafted the biggest small guard in the draft with one of the first round picks in Kenyon Green from Texas A&M. So I expect that unit to regress to average at least. As far as the offense goes as a whole, Davis Mills isn't entering the season as a third round pick who should sit behind Tyrod Taylor and didn't get any reps with the ones, but rather somebody that the coaching staff announced early on already as the unquestioned starter and has a chance to establish himself as the long-term option there. There should be more scoring opportunities altogether. And then of course, I believe Pierce is a way superior talent to anything that they had on the roster last year or even for this year as the second pick of day 3 in the draft. He was heavily underutilized in Florida this past season, but the efficiency was off the charts. He averaged 5.7 yards per carry and twice that per catch, scoring on 16 of his 119 total touches. He led the FBS and PFF rushing grade, and with a missed tackle force rate of 0.39 per attempt. Rex Burkhead, who led this backfield in touches this last year, is still there, but he averaged only 4.2 yards per touch. They did bring over Marlon Mack from Indy, who was a solid player, but he was basically shelved by the Colts last season, and has yet to show that he's back from a ruptured Achilles. I believe Pierce has all the skills to be an every down back, with the power to run for tackles, the wiggle to make people miss after the catch, and the punch to neutralize blitzes on third down. Please just don't talk too much about him. And finally, as far as the round is concerned, I want to talk about another rookie here, and we're getting to the deep sleepers with Tyler Algier of the Atlanta Falcons. This rookie is from the 5th round, but looking at where he's going in drafts as the RB 50 and 150th overall, I don't quite see checking out that way in terms of the opportunities to produce and have him as my RB 39. And I do realize that this is me talking about the Falcons running back for the second straight year, and unfortunately it wasn't Cordarrelle Patterson. I would definitely say that Mike Davis was a disappointment in real and fantasy football last season. He only had a good 600 yards and 4 touchdowns from scrimmage, despite being healthy for all 17 games. However, he was going in the 6th or 7th round, while Algier is barely being drafted in fantasy leagues. Looking at how Atlanta used that position, other than Davis's 130 carries, the rest of the true running backs on the roster combined for only 89 attempts. Cordarrelle Patterson finally had a breakthrough season as an offensive player, as this Swiss Army knife who could motion in and out of the backfield and create big plays for them, pretty much equally splitting his production as a rusher and receiver with close to 1,200 total yards and 11 touchdowns. The Falcons did bring him back on a 2-year, $10.5 million contract, so it could be a sign of things to come, and maybe Arthur Smith is the one to finally unlock this guy. But it's 153 carries from 2021. But his 153 carries from 2021 aren't anything that you would call a workhorse necessarily. And even if he comes close to that number, there's still plenty of opportunities now available with Davis out of the mix. While the team to me should be much more run-centric without Matt Ryan on the center, at least in neutral game situations. It's the second year of Arthur Smith installing this inside-outside zone-based rushing attack, and whether they have Marcus Mariota or Desmond Ridder in the lineup, they create similar challenges for opponents in terms of what they can do keeping the ball in zone read concepts or bootlegs, slowing down backside pursuits, and opening up cutback lanes as edge defenders are taught more regularly to just go straight up aim for the quarterback no matter what on these. So there's a lot to like in terms of where this is headed altogether, and I see a pretty clear path for this 5th round rookie in Algier to establish himself as a prominent early down rusher. The only actual contenders for touches are free agent Damian Williams, who was a Super Bowl hero for Kansas City, but that was a good 2.5 years ago now, and this past season he only touched the ball 56 times in 12 games for Chicago as their RB3, and one of Quadri Olison, who has struggled to stay healthy and only touched the ball 49 times in his 3 years as a pro. Algier, over his last 2 seasons, racked up over 3,100 yards and 36 touchdowns on 6.4 yards per carry. I really like his fit in this one-cut type of system, with good accelerations to plant that outside foot, the way that he runs with his pads out in front, and pulls his knees up high through contact, to give that offense some attitude with the run game. Last season with the Cougars, well over 70% of Algier's rushing yards came after contact. Patterson will likely remain a featured weapon because of the way that they embraced his skill set in 2021, but Algier could easily lead this team in carries, and while not as many of them may be explosives, I think that 4.6 that he ran at the Combine does not reflect what we saw from him with several breakaway runs. Unless I've already loaded up on running backs, this is a guy that I'll be targeting in the final rounds of all my leagues, which has us moving on to the wide receiver position. And the first thing I want to talk about here is Cortland Sutton of the Denver Broncos. As you can tell from this being my second Broncos player to kick off a position group, a significant uptick in offensive production can be expected with Russell Wilson at the helm. I talked about Javonte Williams already, likely becoming one of the most effective two-way running back options with an extended workload, but it'll be interesting to see which exact offense they will run, and how the presence at the quarterback spot will affect that. The big question to answer here is where exactly they end up landing between what Nathaniel Hackett has been accustomed to in Green Bay and how Russ wants that offense to be structured. Considering the background of Denver's new head coach beyond the Packers, where he has been part of a lot of different offensive systems, I'd say he'll be more willing to accommodate to his new quarterback, who the organization gave up major assets for. With Tim Patrick being lost for the upcoming season due to a torn ACL, he recently suffered in training camp. The idea of him being used as a big slot so he could be an asset in the run game, similar to what they did with El Nazar in Green Bay under Hackett. Jerry Jeudy has a clear shot at becoming the sort of Tyler Lockett of this team, who Russ loved to work those deep option routes off play action with. However, they also have KJ Hamler coming back and could be running more 12 personnel, while I don't really see Jeudy as this 80 to 100 catch guy necessarily, with areas that Russ wants to attack, and a lot of times you see Jeudy going ahead of Sutton. The one thing I feel very secure about is Sutton's role as the X receiver of this offense, who becomes the alert route if given one-on-one opportunities to attack down the boundary, being able to win with his size and speed, as well as get easy yards on slants. Just look at the heat maps for Russ and how much he targets those areas outside the hashes. Think of how productive DK Metcalf has been early on in his career with a healthy quarterback. Sutton may not be quite as freak of an athlete, but he's not that far off, and now Russ doesn't have a conservative coaching staff holding him back to letting it rip. You look at the AFC West, and it's obvious that this team will have to score points against Mahomes, Herbert, and Carr, and we've seen Sutton do it before. In 2019, his second season as a pro, he had over 1,100 yards and 6 touchdowns, with a combination of Joe Flacco, Drew Lock, and Brandon Allen. He then got hurt in the following season opener, and was dealing with a foot injury and unstable quarterback once again last season. I could easily see Sutton produce like a low-end wide receiver 1 or high-end wide receiver 2, and you're probably taking him as your third option. That's tremendous value to me. As you can see with the rankings here, currently going as wide receiver 20, 53rd overall. I have him just in the fringe of the top 10 and my 20th overall player. The next guy up is Rashad Bateman of the Baltimore Ravens. This one was pretty easy for me because I already just talked about him in depth as well as a breakout candidate for 2022. Bateman was Baltimore's first round pick last year, but a groin injury cost him the first 5 games of the season, and it took him a little bit to get back into a groove. However, once he had acclimated himself, there was a lot to like, with the way they consistently threatened vertically, changed up his footwork at the line, was able to snap off routes, consistently frame the football, and then effectively pick up yards after the catch. Here are a few numbers from the write-up that I mentioned. Bateman picked up 29 first downs on his 46 receptions, despite his average depth of target of 8.8 yards, being nearly 5 yards less than what he averaged in college. He only dropped 2 catchable passes, and finished 5th among wide receivers with a contested catch rate of 64% nearly. I mentioned how the Ravens are bound to regress to the mean in terms of run-pass ratio, and even though this may work against my arguments on Baltimore's running back J.K. Dobbins, it's realistic to expect that number to land somewhere in the middle of 2019-20 to 2021. More importantly, with the departure of Marquise Brown and Sammy Watkins to a lesser degree, 32% of the wide receiver target share from last season are now up for grabs. And while the Ravens did draft a couple of tight ends who could largely be working detached from the line, they didn't really add anybody else at the receiver position. That also plays into my next point, which is Bateman running nearly 82% of his routes split out wide as a rookie. Now with him as the clear number 1 option, just reading the room in terms of the moves that they made, and going back to my evaluation of his in college, I would expect Greg Roman and company to move him around a lot and create opportunities for him to consistently be the primary read on plays, and match very well with Lamar's willingness to attack the middle of the field, whether that's being tasked with glance routes on the backs of RPOs, or running dig routes versus linebackers that have to creep up against the run game. That's along with how quick he's at finding space once the initial route is dead and the scramble drill is on, which obviously, we have a guy like Lamar who can extend plays. That's definitely on the table. This may not necessarily be the profile analytics folks love in terms of this wanting to be a run-oriented offense, but imagining Bateman's role in the offense, being able to actually work with Lamar for full offseason, the lack of investments into the receiver position outside of him, and just thinking of the workload he's due, getting him as a wide receiver 4 probably could give you a super consistent option. I have him 10 spots higher for the wide receiver position from 33 to 23, and I'll take him a couple of rounds earlier for sure. Let's get to one of the main names that I wanted to talk about here in Brandon Ayuk of the 49ers. I'm first to acknowledge when I miss on a prediction, but also first to double down on it. I was one of the guys who had Ayuk ranked a lot higher than Deebo Samuel, and if that sounds crazy to you now, just listen to my video from a year ago, or check out the ADPs back then, whether it was the risk of injury, the roles on the offense, or the talent of those players, as I almost had the exact same grade on those 2 guys coming out of the draft. Even though Debo's injury history certainly affected that evaluation, overall he was going ahead of Debo by like 3 or 4 rounds at times. Now, will I back down on my statements that I made about Ayuk, the player? Absolutely not. Look at his athletic profile, his burst off the line, ability to attack the ball in the air, and his incredible skills after the catch. They're all very intriguing to me. And we saw him put it on display already last season, once he made it out to Kyle Shanahan doghouse, which took about 7 weeks of the season, as Kyle is notorious for being tough on his young receivers. Over the final 10 games, Ayuk averaged 69 yards and half a touchdown, which made him the wide receiver 20, tied with Mike Evans. 22 of his targets from that point on were 10 plus yards downfield and outside the numbers, even though those are clearly the areas of the field that Jimmy G tends to avoid, just looking at heat maps. Ayuk is still a designated X receiver for an offense which runs a lot through that guy as the primary read in the drop by pass game. We've seen several amazing clips from him in training camp already, making highlight catches down the sideline to take advantage of Trey Lance's willingness to push the ball down the sidelines, unlike Jimmy G, who has avoided those areas of the field consistently. Ayuk has another year in a system that is hard to master for receivers, and we've even heard him talk about how nice it is to not have Shanahan in his ear, but rather in the ones of a rookie. Everything I loved about Ayuk last season is still right there. It may not be as efficient of an offense as it was with Jimmy G, but it certainly will be a more explosive one, and now you can get this guy at a discount, probably as a wide receiver 4. Let me leave you with one more statistic here. For all of last season, Brandon Ayuk was targeted 20 plus yards down the field just 6 times. As Robert Mace said on the Athletic Football Show, that's a crime. I'm 100% buying the post-hype year version of Ayuk. And as you can see on the screen right now, I'm taking him a good 3 rounds earlier than the guys across the industry do. Number 4 for wide receivers here is Christian Kirk, who is now in the Jacksonville Jaguars. Looking at where he's going currently as the wide receiver 42 and 100th overall right now. I personally have him 40 spots higher overall and as my wide receiver 27. Do I believe that Kirk is a top 20 receiver in the NFL? Do I believe he's worth $18 million per year? Not really, and absolutely not. However, that doesn't mean that he isn't a really nice fantasy option, and smart players do follow the money, especially look at who the franchise identified as a long-term part of the plan, with so many young guys still being evaluated, and veteran skill players on 1-year deals. The Jags did also sign veterans Zay Jones and Evan Ingram, which a lot of those I'll get to in a little bit, who will have their role in that offense, but looking at the other pieces there, Kirk is the one big addition that they've made and secured for the next 4 years. We don't know exactly how that offensive system Jacksonville will look like, because Doug Peterson took a full year off. We're probably transitioning to some degree away from the RPO heavy plan that we saw from him in Philly. I do still believe that that will be a prominent element, looking at what Lawrence ran in college and just making things easy for him, but it would also be foolish to not take advantage of his skills as a deep ball thrower. We've seen a primary slot receiver like Nelson Aguilar have plenty of success under Peterson, but T-Law also has the confidence to make those far-hedge throws, where Kirk may be the Z in trips and testing those quasi-one-on-ones, with so many teams now adapting quarters principles on the back end. He can do a lot of the stuff that Laviska Shenault was tasked with in terms of jet sweeps, different variations of screens, glance routes, and so on, who did have 111 combined targets and carries. Playing with a quarterback whose biggest issues came deciphering post-snap rotations as a rookie, getting somebody who has been a great zone beater, could give the young single call a security blanket, and he offers that vertical element as well that we saw from him in Arizona. Looking at Kirk himself this past season, he put up career highs with 9.5 yards per target, 16 catches of 20 plus yards, and 45 first downs picked up. That's playing with an uber talented quarterback in Kyler Murray, but also considering that he rarely attacked the middle of the field, where Kirk is a major threat to snatch the ball and outrace defensive pursuit across the field. I still very much believe in the talent of Lawrence and the center, and the coaching staff brings a lot more stability to the franchise. Kirk is one guy that the power structure that they have in place now has really targeted this offseason, and I see a role for him to produce like an upper tier wide receiver 3, so in that range he's definitely a target of mine. Bringing us to the final receiver here, which is Sky Moore of the Kansas City Chiefs, currently going as the wide receiver 50, 122nd overall. As you can see, I have him significantly higher as my wide receiver 37 and inside the top 100. I know I can only speak on one of these guys for Kansas City, and Moore is definitely the one I have my eyes on, but let me just say this as a whole. The uncertainty about usage and target share for the entire Chiefs receiving corps has pushed everybody down further than they should be. This is still the group that gets to play in the Patrick Mahomes, Andy Reid, Eric Bieniemy run offense, which has been between 61 and 62% pass rates all 3 years of that constellation. Yet even with Juju Smith-Schuster rising in the late 20, early 30 range, the next 3 receivers for them are going between 50 and 60 for the position on average. Travis Kelce will always be among the most targeted tight ends in the league, but Tyreek Hill led this group with 159 targets last season, which was 7th league-wide, and now with him being traded to Miami, those are up for grabs, along with another 100 between Byron Pringle and Demarcus Robinson, who both are also now out of the building. Let's just live in this crazy universe for a second, where Juju takes up all the production of Tyreek next season. Even if the wide receiver 2 for this group just becomes Byron Pringle exactly, that's still a wide receiver 57 from 2021, which is right in the range of the other targets. Now let me give you some news. Juju is not cheetah, not even close. And I actually called him out for the Chiefs when I discussed my designated free agency targets for all 32 teams, because I really like what he can provide as a power slot. Not only is another option to work the middle of the field in the underneath areas, but also as a setup man for pick plays, having to get the ball to the perimeter and stuff like that. Still, even without Tyreek, I don't imagine Juju all of a sudden becoming this big play machine, as happy as I am for him, after having to deal with one of the lowest ADPs in the league catching passes from Ben Roethlisberger. I believe he has a pretty fixed role and will be a viable fantasy option, but with where his ADP has risen, that's not the guy I'm targeting from this group. Not only did I mock Sky Moore to the Chiefs late in the first round and even put some money on it, and they actually stole him around later, but as soon as they picked him, I thought he was one of the favorites for Offensive Rookie of the Year, and I also have some money on it happening now. To me, it's just the closest thing to resemble what Tyreek gave them, because there's a misconception about every pass cheetah is caught being 40 plus sets down the field. As defenses have started forcing Pat Mahomes to go underneath, he has become the guy that flip the ball out to routinely and make defenders look stupid. Over the last 2 years, just over 40% of his scrimmage yards have come after the catch, or actually were counted as straight up rush attempts, and just below that rate is his percentage of snaps spent in the slot. That's literally what Western Michigan used Moore as, leading all draft eligible receivers with 26 missed tackles forced this past season. However, if they do want him to threaten the defense vertically, where the only other guy with the speed to do so on that roster now is a largely unreliable Marcus Scantling, Sky did clock the fastest 10-yard split at the combine according to multiple teams, showing the ability to stress defenders off the line, and then he also had the largest hands of the group, where he can position his body and snatch the ball off the air in contested situations down the field. The ability to catch the ball against zone coverage and create big plays after the catch, or defeat man coverage, as only 16% of his targets for him were contested last season. He can kind of do it all, and right now I predict he leads this receiver group in yards, which for a wide receiver 5 or maybe even 6 in some leagues in the Chiefs offense, that is just stealing to me. Now let's move on to the tight end position, and the first name up here, maybe not as exciting to the casual fans, Cole Kmet of the Chicago Bears. Ask any average NFL fan, and they probably don't even know who Kmet is, much less are aware that he was top 12 in targets, catches, and receiving yards among tight ends last season. The 2020 second round pick by the Bears also basically doubled his personal numbers from rookie to sophomore campaign, while his snap percentage shot up from 56 to 83%, and his per game numbers actually surpassed Allen Robinson for Chicago's offense. So why the hell was he only the tight end 21 in half PPR formats? In one of the weirdest statistical anomalies I can remember, Kmet didn't score a single touchdown on any of his 60 receptions. That's nearly impossible. The Bears' 3 other guys at the position, and Jimmy Graham, Jesse James, and Jesper Horsted, had 6 touchdowns and 34 targets only, compared to Kmet's 91, and none of those guys are on the team any longer. As I mentioned when I broke him down in detail as a breakout candidate for 2022, expecting another jump in production and awareness at least in the fantasy community, not only did Chicago finish 29th with only 16 touchdowns through the air, but adding to the 12 red zone targets that Kmet saw, of which he caught half by the way, just not for touchdowns, there are another 10 now available with the departure of Jimmy Graham alone, while Luke Getsy coming over as the new offensive coordinator brings a touchdown-friendly Packers offense for tight ends. Projecting what the system will look like schematically, there are typically a lot of yards after catch opportunities for that position, slipping underneath or working over the top of linebackers as the counterpunch to the wide zone run game, where Kmet brings the force to run through defenders trying to corral him. Looking at where Kmet and now second-year quarterback Justin Fields excelled at last season, they are a beautiful match, and this once again is from my write-up that hopefully by now you've already pulled up on another tab. Kmet had a 94.8 receiving grade on medium depth targets, so those in the 10 to 19 yard downfield range, while Fields had a medium passing depth grade of 78.1, which was his best by far, and was one of the most aggressive passes when it comes to average depth of target. And finally, just looking at who else is on the roster, Donald Mooney is the clear wide receiver 1 for them, and I expect his numbers to continue to rise, but Allen Robinson is now in LA, and after Mooney, you're looking at Byron Pringle, Equanimous St. Brown, third round pick Velus Jones Jr., and a bunch of uninspiring names. giving Kmet as a low tier tight end 1 at the price of a mid tier tight end 2 all day long. Looking at my rankings, where I have him at tight end 9 compared to tight end 14 across the industry, especially with Chicago facing the easiest schedule for tight ends based on average points allowed last season to the position by their opponents, according to Fantasy Pros. Another kind of gets me excited, and feel free to call me weird for this, is Evan Ingram. I understand why a lot of Giants fans have been frustrated with Ingram because of several ugly drops in high leverage moments and just some of the inconsistency we've seen, but let's be real here. Before this past season, he averaged 50 yards per game. In tight end land, that's pretty high up there. For some perspective, only 7 guys at that position crossed that mark last season. That's playing for a New York offense that has finished 31st in points scored in 3 of his 5 seasons in the league, along with 16th and 18th in the other 2 years, catching passes from a broken down Eli Manning and a highly inconsistent Daniel Jones with very underwhelming coaching staffs. Now, just looking at where Jacksonville finished last season statistically, being dead last in scoring and the quarterback being tied for a league high in interceptions thrown, it may not look a whole lot better on the surface, but let's not act like those numbers can really be taken seriously, playing for a coach who might literally go down as one of the worst hires in league history for what he did on and off the field. There are several reasons Trevor Lawrence was the number 1 overall pick in last year's draft and was penciled in for that spot for a good 2 years basically. The talent is off the charts, and I believe he will be so much better just by having solutions conceptually, better weapons around him, and structure around the team. However, as much as his coaching staff will do for the young signal caller, Doug Peterson's track record for the tight end position is what should really encourage people. Between 2016 and 20 with the Eagles, they were number 1 in the league in targets, catches, and first downs by the tight end position, along with 30 touchdowns. I already talked some about what the Jaguars offense may look like in 2022, but one area I haven't really mentioned is how much Peterson and company used the tight ends as coverage indicators back in Philly, where they would routinely split them out wide to see who would shadow them and create cleaner pictures. And Ingram has that skill set to win on the perimeter, and won't be an obvious mismatch athletically against almost any linebacker. This should be a much more open passing attack for Jacksonville, with the skill players that they've brought in. While none of them may be super high volume targets, Dan Arnold did have success with them, with 324 yards in 8 games, but it's more encouraging to me to project how productive Evan Ingram could be, because this regime specifically targeted him, and just think that the 21 Jaguars finished 29th in offensive plays run, while all of the 5 offenses under Peterson as a head coach have finished top 8 in pace. I believe it's alright there for him, and he's a chance to put up career highs, which would make him a legitimate starting option on a weekly basis, and you can completely disregard tight end until the end of the draft potentially. As you can see, my tight end 17, 20th overall, and going a couple rounds later than that. And finally, here's another somewhat forgotten first round tight end from a couple of years ago, in Hayden Hurst, now with the Cincinnati Bengals. If you listen to these fancy diamond segments over the last couple of years, back in 2020 I said if you took one guy away from a list that you should target, it was Hurst, after being traded to Atlanta for a 2nd round pick going back to Baltimore. And considering he was the tight end 13 based on ADPs, and ended up finishing top 10.5 in full PPR formats, that was still a pretty good call, but he didn't quite live up to my expectations, and his numbers significantly dropped off last season, with Atlanta selecting a unicorn at that position with 4th overall pick Kyle Pitts. Not landing on his 3rd team in 5 years doesn't look great necessarily on his resume, but once again, I believe that Hurst presents an undervalued asset based on opportunities and the type of offense he's becoming part of. 2021 Bengals finished 7th in the league in terms of yards and touchdowns through the air, while their top tight end CJ Uzomah, who signed a free agent deal with the Jets this offseason, finished just 7 yards short of 500 and scored 5 touchdowns and 63 targets. That was good for 15th to 17th at the position depending on format. Yet Hurst is currently going as the tight end 24, and I'd argue he's a more talented player in terms of his feel as a route runner, his plucky hands, and the physicality that he shows after the catch. And we saw Uzomah be more heavily featured down the stretch, in particular in the playoffs. From what I can tell, the concern is if Hurst will actually be the starter in 11 personnel for Cincy, but considering how dramatically Drew Sample's production decreased last season, as more of a designated blocking option, I don't really have any doubt who will be the beneficiary in this situation, where there's 3 elite to still really good receivers around him, and a lot of opportunities to take advantage of that space created. I believe with how Joe Burrow has already carried his team to nearly winning it all, we continue to see the offense be put more in his hands, and some of those ugly run tendencies on early downs and from 12 personnel disappear to create more opportunities. And with defenses scared as shit having to take away Jamar Chase deep, we could see Hurst have a lot of room underneath or down the seams if the safety has to shade to the outside. I'm not saying rely on this guy to be a starter, but in 2 tight end leagues, in deep formats, or just as a waiver target, don't overlook this name. I got him as tight end 19 compared to 24th, if you're looking where he's going based on ADPs. We could talk about 3 defenses I'll be targeting, and with that, I mean with one of my final 2 picks, because as soon as any of those units enter the bye week, I will be streaming unless they are the number 1 scorers in the league somehow. First up, the Green Bay Packers. They were the number 10 defense in fantasy football, despite not having the number 1 corner and an All-Pro from 2020 in Jaire Alexander. Now they drafted 2 guys from the historically great Georgia defense in the first round, and are entering year 2 in the system of defensive coordinator Joe Barry. They are certainly in that group for me in terms of who I believe will be the best defenses in the NFL, and they could easily be right up there for fantasy purposes as well. I may get them as that without having to reach up from one of the 2 bottom rounds. Second, the Miami Dolphins, and this is one I just don't get. This was tied for the 5th best fantasy defense in 2021, despite the team starting the season with a 1-7 record, when they were missing several key contributors on that side of the ball. They nearly cut their points allowed in half over the second half of the year compared to the first 8 games. Now they're bringing back all 11 starters and the defensive coordinator despite the change at head coach, along with adding a productive veteran edge rusher in Melvin Ingram, and a stupid athlete at the linebacker position in 3rd round pick Channing Tindall from Georgia. And then as an option in larger leagues, the Tennessee Titans. Count me in as a skeptic for this team because of the loss of A.J. Brown, and more importantly the lack of depth throughout the roster. But at some point the hate for last year's number 1 seed in the loaded AFC, and especially the defense, needs to stop. The Titans finished as the number 9 defense in fantasy, with rankings at that mark or better in points allowed, 3rd down red zone percentage, rushing yards, sacks and others. The depth is a question mark, but they bring back 10 of 11 starters, and get back last year's 3rd round pick Caleb Farley, who I consider a tremendous cornerback talent. Defense 22? No way. Here's just a quick recap on all the names that I mentioned today. 3 quarterbacks, Derek Carr, Daniel Jones and Zach Wilson. Running backs, Javonte Williams, J.K. Dobbins, Tony Pollard, Damian Pierce and Tyler Algier, the 2 rookies. Wide receivers, Cortland Sutton, Rashad Bateman, Brandon Ayuk, Christian Kirk and Sky Moore. 3 tight ends, Cole Kmet, Evan Ingram and Hayden Hurst. And just under 3 defenses, the Packers, Dolphins and Titans. Alright, and that's gonna do it. This should give you a good look at just some of the guys that I'll be targeting and which strategy I may be following, although everybody has to choose their own path, consider league settings, the other managers, and so many other factors. But I hope this helped, and feel free to let me know what you think about the list, or any players that you'll be looking to draft yourselves. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed my perspective and are interested in more of my content, which I've pretty much posted either here or on my page helloswithfootballtalk.com, all but 2 weeks this year I believe, leave a like, consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't yet, and follow me on social media. The links are in the video description and on the screen right now. Next week I'll put up my preseason power rankings over on my page, and then I'm already working hard on my full season predictions, going through all the awards and predicting every single game leading up to the Super Bowl. Would love for you to come back and hear your thoughts. So until then, see you later. Peace!